Everyone has encodings. You have encodings, I have encodings. They're different encodings from each other. And we have lots of encodings we'll never discover in a lifetime. It's just the question is, as our lives unfold, which encodings will we maybe even almost accidentally discover through the experiences of life? And the critical thing isn't that I have to find what I'm better at relative to all other people in the world. The critical question is to discover what I'm more encoded for relative to other ways I could spend myself.
Welcome to the Evolving with Gratitude podcast. I'm your host, Lainie Rowell. I'm an author and speaker, and I'm here to help you optimize happiness, relationships, and performance. Hey, friend, what does it mean to live in frame with who we actually are? Today's conversation is a real gift. Jim Collins is the author of multiple international bestsellers, including the perennial favorite, Good to Great, and his books have sold more than 11 million copies worldwide. He has described himself as reclusive by temperament and naturally selective with his time, which makes this conversation an extraordinary honor. In this first part of our two-part conversation, we talk about his new book, What to Make of a Life, the decade of research behind it, what he calls encodings, and even the cost of doing what you love. This really is a treat. Enjoy, Jim Collins.
Good morning.
It's still morning for you?
Well, I get 2 mornings. Actually, so it's 11 o'clock here. So,
Okay. Yeah.
and I get 2 mornings every day anyways, because I nap in the afternoon and then I get a second morning after napping. So I get to say good morning at about 4 in the afternoon and anytime up till noon.
I love it. Well, and I'm a big fan of your work. I'm sure that goes without saying, but I'm super excited to have this conversation.
Yeah, and I've been looking forward to our conversation too, because what we've learned about you is you are always prepared and you are always curious. And that will form the basis of a marvelous conversation. So I'm very, very much going to follow your lead.
Okay, well, I'm very excited about that and honored that you all would even know that about me. So yes, I devoured your book. Can I just nerd out a little bit?
Sure, that would be right in frame for me.
Okay, good. So this is like
I see many tape flags.
that's not even all that it was underlined, and these
Yeah.
are like my questions for you. But I have to tell you that this has been one of my book trophies for decades.
Mm.
And I know we're here to talk about what to make of a life, which I absolutely love. But I do hope we get a chance to maybe for just a moment or two dip into the connection to Good to Great. Good to Great came to me at the best time because
Mm.
I'd been a classroom teacher for years and then I was offered a district level position, a leadership
Mm.
position, and I had no formal leadership education or anything like that. And as a district, we were reading Good to Great, and it just hit me at the perfect time. So thank you for that. And
Mm.
then I am 50, and so this is the book that I needed to read
Mm.
at this moment. So
Yeah.
just thank you. I know you
Yeah.
weren't planning around me, but it felt like you might have
Well, I'm delighted to hear about the impact of Good to Great at a pivotal time in your leadership. And then this one may be coming at a pivotal time in life. 50 is, of course, still really quite young through the lens of this book. And one of the wonderful things about the reach of Good to Great is it did reach into education. And Good to Great in the social sectors, the little monograph that went with it, as well as Good to Great itself, bridged over, even though it was based on studying what makes great companies
Mhm.
tick, because it had that comparative analysis of the good to greats to the comparisons. It really was more about what really separated the leaders and the people and the decisions that they made to build something really great. And I didn't expect it to make as much of a jump to the non-business sector as it did. I actually think that maybe as much as half of the readership of Good to Great ultimately was from outside of business.
I mean, it was just level 5 leadership
Mm-hmm.
has been a welcome tenet
Mm.
in my brain
Mm.
since the moment I read the book. And so it was truly lovely
Mm.
to be reading What to Make of a Life. Jim, can we like rewind because I
Mm.
I know from reading the book it's 10 years of research, 2
Yep.
years of writing.
Yep.
What question were you originally going in here to
Yeah.
answer and did that change over time?
Oh, it's a nice question. So, I originally thought of this as a question about self-renewal because a wonderful mentor, wise man by the name of John Gardner, had opened my eyes to the question that all of us face at one form or another, which is how do we keep ourselves renewed over the really long course of a life? And I was thinking really hard about, well, how would you actually study that? And then what happened is I constructed the study itself. And this has happened in all my previous books, actually, where I start with a narrower question and then the research method leads to a bigger question. So back with Built to Last, way back in the 90s with Jerry Porras, we were studying corporate vision. And then it turned out that we had these match pairs of companies, the visionary company and the comparison company, over 100 years each. And I realized that what we really had was trying to figure out what separates enduring great visionary companies from the others. And so the question grew. Here, what happened is I had a marvelous method for studying renewal, which was to look at people, pairs of people, at these cliff events, these moments where life fractures or changes in some significant way, and you have to re-answer the question of what to make of a life. And by looking at that how they renewed past it, all of a sudden realized the method gave me a much bigger lens, which is I could address the big question, what to make of a life when you're coming out of the fog of youth, what to make of a life when you're hit with a life-altering cliff, and what to make of a life so that you're renewed all the way till the end.
Can we talk a little bit about cliffs for a moment? By
Mm-hmm.
the way, I have a very well prepared list of questions, and it's
Sure,
never going to happen because
sure.
I'm just going to ask you questions because I'm excited to hear about them. So for a cliff,
Mm-hmm.
it seems like there are some cliffs that you can anticipate, and some
Mm.
cliffs that completely just come out of nowhere.
Yep.
And so, can you just talk a little bit more about cliffs and
Mm-hmm.
kind of and at one point, I do want to maybe specify a little bit about what a matched pair is for people
Yeah,
who might not completely understand that, because the
sure.
storytelling is riveting in the book.
Mm-hmm.
Like that is absolutely one of the best teachers in the book
Mm-hmm.
is your storytelling. But can we talk a little bit more about what cliffs are
Mm-hmm.
and the ones you see coming and the ones you don't?
And the ones you don't, and how different those are. So the essence of it. Let me just kind of even rewind very briefly the tape of where the cliff idea came from. It came from a deeply painful personal moment in my life and my wife's Joanne's life, and she was a world-class athlete. She was a world champion athlete, had won the Hawaii Ironman in 1985, and then had a hamstring injury that never healed. And she faced the brutal reality that her athletic career was going to come to a premature conclusion because this injury simply would not heal. And one day we were sitting around our kitchen table in Palo Alto, where we lived at the time, and she just gasped, "I feel like I'm dying." And it was a really painful moment. Of course, for her, it was very painful to lose that identity of being an athlete, a world-class athlete, to something that was out of her control, the injury. But for me, it was really painful because I had no answer for her, right? She's the most important person in my life. And she felt like she was dying with this end of this definition of her. And that's what really planted the seed of, there come these times in life where something changes in your life, something so significant changes in your life that it forces really significant questions about what's next. And sometimes even having to recast and completely re-envision your life coming out of the cliff. And so that's the seed of where cliffs came from and what cliffs are about. Your question about sometimes you can see the cliffs coming and sometimes you can't. So if you look at, say, our athletes in the study, such as we had NFL football players, their life as professional athletes will come to an end at some point, and they know that the cliff is inevitable. It doesn't mean it's easy, but you can see it coming, right? And so, or Alice Paul and Lucy Burns, who were fighting for women's suffrage. And the cliff in their case was they won, which then left them the question of what to do with the rest of their lives. But they could see that they were beginning to build enough momentum that they might well win, and that would be a cliff, meaning they'd have to redefine their lives. But then there's the shockingly unexpected ones. So one of the pairs in the study, as you know, is Cardis Collins and Marion Pittman Allen. And the cliff they're matched at is the death of their husbands. One died in a plane crash, and the other died of a heart attack. Neither of them saw that coming. And then they were not only faced with the cliff of losing the defining person in their life, they inherited their husband's seats in Congress, which they had never prepared for. So they got kind of a double cliff, which is, I never saw myself as a congressperson, and now I've lost my husband and I have his seat in Congress. I never expected to be here. And those shocking out of the blue cliffs that just hit you, those ones tend to have a not a different pattern, but much thicker fog after the cliff.
You talk about in the book the different types of fog, and we can get
Yep.
into that. But is it okay if we back up for a
Yeah,
minute and
sure.
talk about the matched pairs? Because I feel
Yes.
like someone who hadn't read the book and I heard this conversation and didn't truly understand the significance of the matched pairs, I
Yes.
think it would be a disservice. So
Yeah.
please tell us, why is
Yeah.
this so important?
Yeah. So I've always used matched pairs in my research where I like to take pairs of in the past in my prior work and say good to great. It would be like pairs of companies that were at the same time and same resources, same potential, same opportunities at a given moment in time. And then, one would break out and the other wouldn't. And so their circumstances were somewhat constant, but their sort of choices and decisions coming out of it were different. And then I could compare and contrast. And that was the methodology behind Built to Last, Good to Great, Great by Choice, How the Mighty Fall, all those books. So when it came to studying people, I also felt it'd be powerful to have people who were facing a very similar circumstance, but then would make very different choices coming out of it, and I could compare and contrast. And so, for example, you could take a look well, let me just back up for a moment. I want to be really clear about one very important difference between this study and those who might know my prior work. My wife, Joanne, came in as I was getting deep into this research one day, and she said to me, "Remember, Jim, people are not stock returns." And what she meant by that is that whereas when I'm studying companies, I can really, determine which company was better than the other company.
Mhm.
Here, I'm not using match pairs to say that one person was better than another person. I'm looking at how they were different. Their cliff was the same, end of NFL career, winning the 19th Amendment, death of husband, whatever, right? And their choices were different, but it doesn't mean, so in the other studies, it was always this one better than that one. In this study, it's two people rising, hit a cliff, and then they diverge, but you couldn't say this one's better than that one. And we can pop back to that, but let me just pause there for a moment because I'd love to help people see the power of having those pairs, but let me just give you a chance for your curiosity to go with that.
Well, it was more just a comment that sprung into my mind is just throughout the book, you're so careful
Mm-hmm.
to make sure that people don't think you're saying judgment wise,
Right.
this one was better than this one. But you've picked people who have had significant contributions and watched how their story has unfolded, and we'll get into encodings, but it was just an observation that
Mhm.
it
Yeah.
is such a nuanced but important thing to think about. No, we're not judging these
Right.
people, we're observing and we're noting and we're seeing these things
That,
to illustrate a point.
that's exactly right. And so just to help your listeners grasp this, if you take, for example, one of the opening pairs is in the second chapter of the book where I finally get into looking at concepts and then pairs to illustrate them. Two women in science, Barbara McClintock and Grace Hopper, and they both illustrate how when you put them side by side, really important lessons, and yet they do it in very different ways. So their cliff was they were women in science. Barbara McClintock as a pioneering geneticist who eventually won a Nobel Prize, and Grace Hopper, who was early in the development of computers and essentially was the champion for making computers really useful through software. But both of them faced the cliff that they couldn't continue doing their scientific work within the confines of a traditional university in the era in which they were women in science, which was the first half of the 20th century. So their cliff was they had to find a different way. They had to re-envision their life so that they could continue to do the work that was so important to them. But what's so interesting when you look at these two, they're both, their lives are so parallel, different, slightly different fields, but so parallel to the point of this cliff in terms of discovering an arena in which to deploy themselves. And both of them found something that we'll chat about in a minute that they were deeply encoded for. Both of them didn't do it for the money. That to them, money was there as a means to do what they were really encoded for. And they both really focused their inner fire on making it happen. But then when you look under the surface, so that's common.
Yeah.
But what's different is how different they brought that to life. Because Barbara McClintock was this solitary scientist who loved to work alone and get lost in her maze fields. And even the day she won the Nobel Prize, she didn't even have a telephone. They couldn't even call her. And when they finally found her, she was out on a walk, like picking walnuts, and she just was just burrowing ever deeper into studying the control of genes, and loved the freedom to just work alone.
Yeah.
And Grace Hopper, she's over here advancing computer science, but she worked through institutions and people. She was in the Navy. She was one of the early pioneering leaders in building a team of software designers at a company. And she was she had tremendous encodings for organizing people inside institutions to really advance the cause of computers. And that was a brilliant set of encodings that she had. And so both of them share in common, they're encoded for it. They focus the fire on it. They didn't do it for the money. The money was there to help them do what they were encoded for. That was common. But then you look at how different the people are.
Mm.
And by putting them side by side, you realize that the critical thing was there wasn't a single recipe book of like, do these 10 steps. Because in the end, they were encoded so differently from each other that the way they made choices that worked for them reflected those encodings. And hence, one of the critical things to take away when this is what the patch pairs really show you is it's not you should try to do what Grace Hopper did, and it's not you should try to do what Barbara McClintock did. It's that what you should do is to do what they did, which is to trust their own encodings, which were idiosyncratic to them.
Absolutely. Okay, you queued me up perfectly to talk about encoding. So I would love for you to explain what encodings are and
Mm-hmm.
what they aren't,
Mm.
because I think people will bring their own experiences and knowledge to if they hear the word encoding without a description, and they're going to think, oh, it's strengths, oh, it's
Mm.
intellectual genius or things like
Mm.
that. So I'm just going to
Mm.
ask you to share what it is and what it isn't. Like, I
Yeah.
speak and write about gratitude a lot, and
Yeah.
so I like to tell people what it is and what it isn't. Like,
Yeah.
gratitude isn't about ignoring what's hard. It's about
Yeah.
refusing to overlook what's good, and there's a
Yeah.
difference. So what
Yeah.
would be your version of that for encoding?
So, encodings, as I came to understand them, are these like durable capacities that reside inside us, awaiting discovery through the experiences of life. So I can train myself to be strong at something, but it isn't necessarily a deep capacity that, when activated, would really shine bright relative to other ways in which I could expend myself. I'll just use a personal example of this. I have a strength at mathematics because I worked really hard at math. I majored in math sciences in college. And so, okay, I can do differential equations. But that's a strength that I have because I've met people, and I met them in college, who were actually really encoded for math, right? It
Mhm.
was really natural for them. It just really clicked for them. And so while I turned math into a strength through sheer hard work and will,
Mhm.
they had a more natural encoding for math. And as a result, I had to find other things in life that are actually more deeper, intrinsic, durable capacities that I could express. And so I've got a strength in math, but math isn't what I'm really encoded for, which is to research and to write and to teach and so forth. And so we can all develop strengths, things that we can become strong at, just like you can build muscles by training, right? But that doesn't necessarily determine whether you would be encoded to be, say, a distance runner
Yeah.
versus, say, a middle linebacker, right? You both could get stronger with your muscles, but in one role you're really well encoded, and in another role you're really not well encoded. And so that distinction between encodings, which you discover, versus strengths, which you kind of add by training and work and discipline. The other thing about the encodings I want to highlight, you use this notion of genius. Everyone has encodings.
Mhm.
Everyone has encodings, and there are more encodings than any of you have encodings. I have encodings. They're different encodings from each other, and we have lots of encodings we'll never discover in a lifetime. It's just the question is, as our lives unfold, which encodings will we maybe even almost accidentally discover through the experiences of life? And the critical thing isn't that I have to find what I'm better at relative to all other people in the world. The critical question is to discover what I'm more encoded for relative to other ways I could spend myself.
So, how would you say, because you talk in the book about being in frame,
Yes.
so are there ways that we can actually look for these
Mm,
encodings? Like, what is
yeah.
the best way to get into frame for that?
So let's briefly discuss what it means to be in frame, and then we'll can chat a little bit about this. Sometimes serendipitous, sometimes maybe deliberate process of discovering these things. But the way I sort of think of it is um, think of it as that you have a constellation of encodings, and they're a little bit like they're like stars, right? In a constellation, and the stars are always out there,
Mm.
and at any given moment, though, maybe there's a window frame that you can look through out to that constellation. And and that might be where your life is at a given point. And then when you look through that window, if the window frame is, say, over here and not capturing a lot of the constellation, there aren't many of those encodings coming in through the window. You're sort of out of frame. And if in another time it's capturing a big, bright set of those encodings with what you're doing, you're in frame. So if you take John Glenn, who we write about in that chapter, the astronaut, well, test pilot, fighter pilot, astronaut, and so forth, his initial steps in life, he was studying chemistry. He was maybe going to be a doctor, but it didn't really click for him. It's like the frame was over here. He tried sports. It wasn't really clicking as much. And then through a serendipitous couple of things, he ended up being able to get a pilot's license.
Mm.
And as soon as he got in an aircraft, it's like the frame shifted
Yeah.
and click. Those encodings came through the frame and he felt incredibly natural. His comparison or match companion, not a comparison, match pair companion in the study, Gordon Cooper described flying as his truest element. And what he meant by that was what you could feel like almost like wear the aircraft like a glove. And this incredible instinct for being calm in situations of great danger and of great speed and able to slow time down. All these things that were so intrinsic to being a great fighter pilot, great test pilot, great astronaut. And that was when John Glenn was in frame. Then, after his astronaut career, he spent a decade before he ended up in the Senate, which was a second version of being in frame, at Royal Crown Cola, about 10% of his life, but it only was 0.2% of his memoir. And what I draw from that is that he's still John Glenn, but those times when he was a business executive, I'm sure he was fine at it,
Mhm.
but he wasn't the same way he was as a fighter pilot, astronaut, or a senator. There were just fewer encodings coming through the window, so he was more out of frame. And for all of us, then, life kind of is this shifting the frames in life. And the key is that when you begin to see that the window is capturing the encodings, and I think this is the critical word, you trust them.
Mm.
And I think it's about when you get clues, and you're getting clues all the time, you trust them when they begin to click, as opposed to letting somebody talk you out of them, whether that be a commencement speaker or whether that be a parent or a mentor or a professor or whoever. They might have wonderful advice for you, but it's based on their encodings and they're not the same as your encodings.
You opened the door on the parenting, so I kind of want
Mm,
to explore that for a minute because I do think there's so much nuance in these things. And I do think there's
mhm,
an interesting thing. As a parent, I have a 15-year-old and a
mm,
12-year-old. I'm sure people joining us in this conversation have young people around them. And I think it's difficult. We want to encourage looking for those encodings.
mhm,
And I think the trusting yourself is a really, really good thing because we don't
mhm,
want to narrow too much and miss what could have been in frame. So I'm kind of curious as to like for ourselves or for the people
mm.
that we care about, how do we help nudge them to find the
Yeah,
thing that will put them in frame
yeah.
versus
So,
trying
so
to
I,
be, I don't
I
know.
I'm going to ask you a question about this, but first, I think what's really fascinating to me when I look across the lives in the study, and the thing that made the study so big was I was looking across, wasn't just looking at episodes, right? I was looking at cross in the case of those who are no longer with us, which is most of the people in the study, their entire lives. And most of the others are, the remaining ones are really quite far along. Most of their life is in the record books. And when you look over the long arc, you can see that even the same people, right? John Glenn is still John Glenn. But in these different phases of life, he's either out of frame or in frame. Out of frame studying chemistry relative to in frame flying fighter jets,
Yeah.
relative to less in frame being a business executive back to more in frame as a senator, then run for president, and that's sort of more out of frame. And then he comes back, to really refocus on the Senate, and actually goes back to space again in his 70s, and he's fully back in frame. And so you see these sort of times of life when you're in frame and times of life when you're out of frame. And first of all, I think that that's, for me, a great relief to know that it's not like there's something wrong with you when you're out of frame. You're just out of frame at that time. And that even the same person, all of us may have periods of life when we're in frame and periods of life when we're out of frame, and that's a pretty consistent experience with many of the people that I studied in this book, and that's just a relief, because it's not like they had a perfect record of at age 8 they were in frame and then everything just was perfect. It didn't always work like that. But I want to come back to you on something. I think one of the really interesting things that I thought about, and as the study grew in my mind, I began thinking about younger people. I originally thought about those of us who are looking at the second half of life and how to keep it really renewed, remain in frame, and all that. But I began to see, because I looked at how all these people got in frame early in life, and I think there is this thing of the fog of youth. I didn't really come into frame until my 30s, or about age 30. In my 20s, I was very much in the fog of youth. You would not. I mean, it's a very foggy period. But as a parent, and you have young people coming, how did you think about this as you were reading? How did you read and think as a parent, and how did you read and think in terms of this question of the fog of youth, which seems it certainly happened for a number of the people in our study as well?
Yeah, so I love that question, and I love that you're so curious and that you would be kind enough to ask me a question. I don't think I explicitly thought of the word trust, but I will take it back to
Mm,
the word trust, and that,
yeah.
I mean, there's such a lovely, and we'll get to it about, like, there's no, like, peak at 30 or anything like
Hmm.
that. Like,
Right.
there's still a lot to do, but I think it
Even
really
at
helps.
60 and at 80.
I know, I
Yeah.
mean, that's like, we
Yeah.
have to talk about that,
Yeah.
so I wanna make sure we get to that, but as a parent,
Yeah.
it helped me think, this isn't like, my child is interested in this, and this is what
Mhm.
they'll do the rest of their life, or they're not good at this. That's that's gonna be hard for them. No,
Mm.
there's gonna be other things they're gonna be good at. So I think
Mhm.
as a parent and just someone who's around young people, it just really helped me think about, there's a long way to go
Mm.
here, and there's
Mhm.
going to be things that they discover they like and they don't like, and they'll be in frame and they'll be out of frame. And so it's a stress reliever in a way.
Yes.
It kind
Yeah.
of lowers the anxiety. The
Yeah.
stakes are not as high as you think they are.
Yeah. This great exhale is sort of what
Yeah.
I felt as I studied them. And I would share a couple things with this, that picking up on what you said. It's really interesting. Some of our people found their first in frame really quite early. But I take a look at one of my favorite stories in the book comes in the fog of youth section of the book, which is in the fog chapter 7. And it's about Alice Paul. And, here's Alice Paul, who became this monumental, utterly focused, fire-filled, exceptional leader, and was the strategic architect for getting the 19th Amendment done. And you would not want to compete against Alice Paul, because you would lose. I mean, she was just an amazingly well encoded leader of the fight. Now, what's interesting about Alice Paul is you would think that, well, she must have known this when she was really young. At age 14, she's already wanting to go out and do this. But when you actually look at her entire 20s, she's pinging around. She's starting to get clues. And when she ends up in England, she ends up marching in a march with the suffragists and meets Lucy Burns in a jail. And that kind of starts the process. But there's this zigzagging, right? As she's over in biology and sociology and studying economics and all this different stuff. She looks lost. And yet then when she finally clicks into frame, and these encodings for the strategy that she had, and she's encodings for creating spectacles of protest, which she had, when those finally clicked into frame, then bang, you can see it. But what I take from that is that it took her years to get there.
Yeah.
And so kids may be figuring it out. They may look lost, but that doesn't mean they're not Alice Paul, right? When they click in frame. And the other piece of it is just this notion of there's this idea that you got to find the thing you're made for. But one of the wonderful releases to me of the study is because of the cliffs, where you see people have one form of life definition of what they were doing, maybe come to an end. I was a football player. Well, now I'm over here, as a Supreme Court justice in the state of Minnesota, like Alan Page, or someone like Katharine Graham, who husband, she lost her husband to the disease of manic depression. She ended up running the Washington Post. She didn't even know she had leadership encodings until that experience exposed them and made her one of the great CEOs of all time. And so what I came to understand is that you can move, there isn't one thing you're made for, and you just hope you find it. Rather, there are multiple possibilities of what you are encoded for. And even if you don't discover 9 of 10 of them, it doesn't matter so long as you find one of them. And to know that it is a multi set of possibilities rather than, oh gosh, there's just this one, I find that a tremendous relief. And I would have loved to have known that when I was 25.
I'm 50 and I'm so happy to hear it.
Yeah.
So you're making me think of the stress and drudgery tax.
Yes.
And where I'm coming to that from is thinking about how you want to be paying it for the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you know when you're paying it for the right thing? Like, there's just going to be things that we all do, no matter if we're doing the thing we're most encoded for or one of the things we're most encoded for. It's like, how do we know if we're paying the stress and drudgery tax for the right thing or not?
Mm-hmm. So this is actually sort of ties into two things that I think are that I just want to highlight as we talk about this. So one of the is kind of fully being in frame, of course, has you're in frame with your encodings. And then there's these other two pieces, which is one is that money is to help you be able to do what you're encoded for rather than the purpose of my work is to make money, right? That's the flip of the arrow of money. And we have a whole chapter on that and how they did it practically. And then this notion of focusing the inner fire. And part of the inner fire is that there's a certain compulsion, a love of what you're doing that really almost you can't not do it. But then there's sort of these two really practical dimensions of this when you study the lives, because you could take away, I think, what would be a wrong lesson, which is say, I'm just going to do what I love and everything will work out. Well, it's actually not exactly the way life works. One, on the economic side, these were very practical people that they had to make their economics work. And most of them didn't come from family wealth. And so it's not do what you love, the money will follow. It's do what feeds the fire, which you probably do love doing, the actual doing of it. And you have to be very smart and practical about how you make the economics work to be able to do it. And it's very different thing that the money will follow. I love to ride my bike. Nobody's going to pay me to do it, right? I mean, so that's one, and we have a whole bunch on that. But then the second part is, even if you're doing something that you are so on fire to do, you're fighting for the 19th Amendment. You're playing guitar like Jimmy Page. You're flying fighter jets like John Glenn, right? You're doing surgery or skating like Kenley Albright, which are all these wonderful people in the study. You would sort of think, well, it's all just this blissful soaring through the air. Well, all of them paid this tax, which is no matter how much you love what you're doing, no matter how much it feeds the fire, no matter how encoded you are for it, there's the stress and drudgery tax. No one escapes it. And you basically have this choice. Am I going to be creatively, intensely engaged in life? And if you are, you're going to pay the tax. And and it's not tax in terms of I have to pay tax over here to do this over here that I love. You pay the tax in doing what you love. And that's why we have wonderful examples of that. And then they can be little things like, it can be big things like I.M. Pei when he was architecting. He always had this stress around the initial designs. He described it as traumatic for his wife. He couldn't sleep. He was, and then when he would have controversial designs, he would have to deal with the stress of people approving them. And when he did the Louvre Pyramid, people were spitting at his feet in the streets. And it was wonderful to be an architect that could do that. But he still had the stress and drudgery tax. And it comes, different people have different things that cause the stress and drudgery. Katharine Graham always felt that the notion of like giving the internal talk at the Christmas party would actually fill her with dread to have to do that. And so that was part of the stress and drudgery tax of being the CEO of the Washington Post.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but
Mhm.
everyone's going to pay a
Yep.
stress and drudgery tax.
Yep.
There's
Yep.
parts of the process you might not love. That does not mean you should abandon the process.
That's right. That's right. So, I mean, I'll just speak personally on this. I really love doing my research.
Mhm.
I love making sense of the world. I can be lost for hours in my creative chair, learning about whether it be the companies or the people I studied in this study. I love making sense of what all the data means and constructing frameworks, and I love teaching it and helping people understand it. Now, in order to have the entire system work and to ultimately have an impact with the work, which is part of how my own flywheel works, I also have to go out and teach it. And I love the teaching. I do not love being on airplanes.
Yes.
I mean, I really don't. I find some people love to travel. I find travel to be stress and drudgery. And I find, it's just this tax I pay. I willingly pay it to be able to teach in settings that feed the flywheel and really allow me to share my ideas and to have the work have impact. But it doesn't change the fact that every time it's Monday night and I'm leaving on Tuesday and I've got to get stuff ready to go and I'm packing. It's stress and drudgery. It
Yeah.
just is. And so I could quit, but why would I quit when I still want to do this until I can't do it anymore? And that's the stress and drudgery tax. It just comes with the game.
Okay. I'm curious if it would be a good time to talk about the bug book.
Oh yes, the bug book.
Because I do feel like this is a very practical
Yeah,
way
yes.
that you have
Yeah.
figured out
Yeah.
is the stress and I mean, do you make that? Am I making that connection out of
Yeah.
nowhere, or
Oh
is that
yeah,
a good connection?
absolutely. Yeah,
Okay.
so there's two parts. Let's break this into two parts.
Actually, Jim, that's a brilliant idea. Let's break this into two parts, and this is the perfect place to pause. So we'll pick up from here next time. If you're grateful for this episode, please be sure to subscribe today. And if you're feeling really thankful, please submit a review and share with others so they know the value. One last thing, please connect on social media using the hashtag evolvingwithgratitude to share your gratitude stories.